Welcome to Horseshoe Politics. Today is October 1st, 2020. We're finally here. It's now October of 2020, which means that it's the last full month before the 2020 presidential election. I just wanted to use this video to talk about the current state of the presidential election, first of all, and then I wanted to talk about what all Trump needs to do if he still wants to win this election, because, like I've said in many videos previously, Trump does not have a very good chance of winning this. According to 538.com, Trump only has a little more than a 20% chance of winning this presidential election, and Biden has almost an 80% chance of winning this presidential election. The number fluctuates somewhere between 70 and 80% for Biden over time, but generally, Biden has a lot better of a chance winning than Trump for this presidential election. So I want to talk about what all Trump, needs to do from this point on in order to win this presidential election, despite currently being several points down in the nationwide polls. The first thing I want to do in this video is talk about the presidential debate that took place 2 days ago on September 29th, 2020. Now, yesterday I talked about why I didn't want to make a video talking about the specific details of the presidential debate in which each candidate said, and the reason for this is because of the fact that it was a big mess a lot of the time. Both candidates kept interrupting each other. I'll admit Trump did interrupt more than Biden did, but throughout the debate, both candidates talked over each other repeatedly, and I feel bad for Chris Wallace for having to deal with that. I remember 2 days ago I joked that the audience would be the winner of this debate, but honestly, I don't know if that was the case. I don't think the audience really got too much out of this debate because they weren't really able to get that much substance or that much policy out of either candidate because it was hard to even comprehend. I will say that at some points in the debate, it was kind of funny just seeing them talk over each other all the time and make cheap remarks. I'll admit that part was funny. I guess in that aspect, the audience did get something out of it, but in terms of actual substance, actual policy, there wasn't really much that people got out of that debate that wasn't fairly obvious beforehand. So, before I talk about the winner based on the polls, I want to talk about the winner based on substance. For that, I can't go with either candidate because of the fact that it was so incoherent a lot of the time. Both candidates, they kept trying to interrupt each other before they finished their sentences, before they finished their talking points. And because of these interruptions, it wasn't really possible for them to have a completely fair and objective debate. The reason for that is because neither candidate was able to fully flesh out their talking points or their policies because the other candidate kept interrupting them in the middle. And because of that, neither candidate was able to fully give all their thoughts on a specific issue. And because of that, you weren't really able to get their completely fleshed out opinion on an issue. And if you don't have their complete opinion on an issue, you can't really fairly attack that opinion if you don't even fully know what it is. And for that reason, I'd say that neither candidate really won that debate, just speaking in terms of talking points. If you look at the polls, though, that tells a completely different story. Just speaking about the polls that were taken right after the debate, asking viewers which candidate they thought won that debate. Most of the polls in general say that Biden won by quite a bit. And the reason for that, I would say, is because of the fact that Trump interrupted Biden a lot more than Biden interrupted Trump. So Trump just came off sort of as what I would say whiny. I would say, I think the best word is whiny. Like, he won't let Biden finish, he just has to correct him every 2 seconds. I think that's the general impression a lot of people got from Trump. Biden definitely interrupted Trump quite a bit also throughout the debate, but Trump definitely did it more. Trump did it more frequently. So a lot of people got the vibe that Trump was being kind of whiny. He couldn't even let Biden finish his own talking points. Because of that, more people think that Biden won because he was more serious of a candidate. He looked like more serious of a candidate than Trump. Trump had to keep interrupting Biden while Biden didn't have to do so as much. So a lot of the polls say that Biden won the debate. There's probably some polls here or there that say that Trump won. One of the issues of these polls is you have to make sure you're not having a biased sample. Like, if you have like a Fox News poll, that's going to be targeted towards more conservative audiences. So those polls are probably going to say that Trump won over Biden. But then if you have a more liberal news outlet giving a poll, say like MSNBC, then the MSNBC poll is probably going to say that Biden won instead of Trump. But I think that if you look at all the polls as a whole, most of them will say that Biden won over Trump. And that would make sense. If you're just looking at the average viewer who's undecided, who's a swing voter, I would say, they're probably going to have a better image of Biden in their head than Trump in their head. Most of the people who are watching that debate probably have already made up their mind, and that debate did nothing in changing their mind on which candidate they support. all the Trump supporters are probably going to think that Trump won that debate, and all the Biden supporters are probably going to think Biden won that debate because that's the candidate they agree with more on policies. So it makes sense if they're talking about their own policies and they agree with that policies, they're going to think that they won that debate, both for Biden supporters and Trump supporters. But if you look at the undecided voters, most of the undecided voters, it shows in the polls, thought that Biden won over Trump. Because Biden didn't interrupt as much, he didn't seem as whiny, he seemed more serious, more calm. Also, I think one of the things that Biden did that really helped him win that debate was he looked into the camera a lot, and it was almost as if he was talking directly to the American people. I noticed that Biden did that multiple times throughout the debate, and I'm thinking that's one of the reasons why Biden won, because this year has been tough. A lot of people are struggling to pay their bills, struggling from having COVID or knowing someone who had COVID. Because of that, things have been tough for a lot of people, and just having someone, some authority figure, just looking at you directly through the screen and having almost like a personal talk, I think that really resonated with a lot of people, and because of that, they felt like almost a personal connection with Biden whenever he talked like directly into the camera, and I think that's the one of the reasons why more people, especially swing voters, thought that Biden won that debate over Trump. Now that we've talked about this first debate, let's talk about the upcoming debates and also what else Trump needs to do if he still wants to win this election. I have talked about on this channel many times about how Trump does not have a good chance of getting reelected. Biden has a much better chance of winning this election than Trump does. I have also shown the polls, the national polls to be specific, on this channel, and I showed how in September 2020, on average, Biden beat Trump in the national polls by around 6 percentage points. And you compare that to what Clinton was beating Trump by in September of 2016 in the national polls. In September of 2016, Clinton was only beating Trump in the national polls by around 3 percentage points, while in September of 2020, aka the month that just passed, Biden beat Trump by around 6 percentage points in the national polls. Just based on that, you can easily see how Biden is doing better against Trump now than Clinton was doing against Trump 4 years ago. And if you just look at it logically, Clinton almost beat Trump 4 years ago. Trump narrowly won that election because he was able to flip three swing states that traditionally voted Democrat but flipped to Republican for that election. But if Biden is doing better than Clinton and Clinton almost won, then just logically speaking, it would make sense that Biden would be likely to win this election. But you also look at the national polls, and they show Biden up by several points on Trump. I know that the national popular vote is not what determines the winner of the election, but when you have Biden up against Trump by 6 percentage points, it is really unlikely for him to simultaneously lose the Electoral College while also beating Trump in the popular vote by 6 percentage points. I know people are going to say that the polls aren't that accurate, and they may be correct in that the state polls specifically are not that accurate. If you look at the 2016 polls taken in individual states, those polls, I admit, were not that accurate. But if you look at the national polls, the polls taken from all 50 states across the country plus Washington D.C., those polls were mostly spot on in 2016. The days before the election, the days leading up to the election, the polls taken on those days, they showed Clinton beating Trump by on average 3 percentage points, those polls specifically. And that's almost what the result of the actual 2016 election was. There was only 1 percentage point of a difference in the actual election. In the polls, it showed Clinton beating Trump by 3 percentage points, but in the actual election, Clinton beat Trump by 2 percentage points in the election. The problem is that the popular vote is not what determines the winner of the election for Clinton. The problem for her was that the Electoral College determines the winner of the election. Because of that, even though Clinton got 48% of the vote to Trump's 46%, she still lost the election because she wasn't able to win enough states. Mainly because of the fact that Clinton was not able to win over Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 3 states she thought would be an easy win for her, but Trump ended up winning in a surprise turn of events for Trump. Here's the thing though. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania were narrow wins for Trump. Trump won each of those states by around 1 percentage point, if not less. And the fact that Biden is doing 3 to 4 percentage points better in 2020 overall than Clinton did in 2016, if you have those 3 states follow a similar trend, then they're easily going to go for, not easily, but they're definitely having a good chance of going towards Biden in this election. And those 3 states are all he needs to win this election. If you take all the states that Clinton won in 2016 and then add Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin to that, that's enough for Biden to win this election. Speaking in terms of the Electoral College, If you take the 232 electoral votes that Clinton won in 2016, so you take every state that Clinton won in 2016, then you just add the 10 from Wisconsin, 16 from Michigan, and 20 from Pennsylvania. Once you add those 46 extra electoral votes to the 232 that Clinton won, that's already 278, which is higher than the 270 mark that Biden needs to win this election. So just winning those three states back from the Republicans, or from Trump more specifically, that's all Biden needs to do to win this election. So Trump has to be able to hang on to the Rust Belt states, otherwise it's going to be really hard for Trump to win. I talked about in one of my videos a couple weeks ago about how Trump really needs the Rust Belt to win this election. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard for him to win because he's going to have to find some other states to win that traditionally have voted for Democrats by several percentage points. Okay, I'm actually going to talk about now what Trump needs to do from here on out in order to win this presidential election. The presidential election is just over a month away from today. Today's October 1st, the election is November 3rd. That just leaves Trump 1 month left to change his strategy. Because what he's doing right now, the evidence shows that it's not working. The fact that Biden's up against Trump by several points in the polls shows that what Trump is currently doing, it's not working very well for him. So I'm going to talk about now what Trump could do to win this election still. First thing he needs to do, crush Biden in the last two debates. In yesterday's debate, it was a mixed performance for both candidates, but here's the thing. Whenever there's a mixed performance in the debate where there's no clear winner, the default winner is the one that's already doing well in the polls. Because if nothing changes, the person who's already doing well, they're really the winner because they keep on winning. They keep on doing well in the polls if nothing changes. If you're doing well in the polls, you want to keep on doing that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So even though there was really, at least in my opinion, there was no in terms of substance, there was no winner in yesterday's debate. Biden is the de facto winner, I would say. Biden's like the default winner because he was already heading the polls. This debate didn't do anything to stop that from happening for Biden. This debate didn't do anything to reverse the trend in the polls. So Biden is going to continue to be up in the polls because the debate did nothing to change that. So by default, Biden was the winner of that debate. So Trump needs to crush Biden in the next two debates if he wants a chance at winning this presidential election still. He needs to do that first. Second of all, I think he needs to change up his rhetoric a bit. I think his rhetoric has been a bit too divisive. I think his rhetoric is something that his base goes along with well, but swing voters don't necessarily digest as well. I think in 2016, his rhetoric was a lot more spot on in terms of swinging over moderate voters to his side, but I think in 2020, he's not doing nearly as well in terms of his rhetoric. I think his rhetoric is something that mainly his base can digest easily, but not moderate voters. That was Trump's biggest strength in 2016. He had a strong base, but what was once his strength is now his weakness, I would say, because he has a strong base, but it doesn't matter if you have only your base voting for you. If your base is made up of like 35% of the population, that's quite a bit of the population, but that's not nearly enough to win an election. You need at least around 50% of the population to win an election. What this means is that Trump needs to adopt a style of rhetoric that is better at converting moderate voters to his side, because the current style of rhetoric that he adopts does not do a good job at doing that. It appeals to his base, which is made up of like 35 to 40% of the population, but that's not enough to win an election. He needs to win 50% of the voters over. The other thing is that there's not going to be nearly as many swing voters this time around as there were in previous election cycles, because this year as a whole has been really tough. It's been notably a difficult year for everybody. So a lot more people, they identify more strongly with one political party or the other. So there's less voters in between, I would say. Just things as a whole are more divisive this time around. So there's less undecided voters. A lot of people have already made up their mind on which candidate they're going to vote for. So it's harder for Trump to swing over moderate voters to his side because there's not as many people that are convertible now. So I guess one last thing that Trump really needs to do is he needs to show that he's done a good job handling the pandemic. He needs to let the American people know that if he is president for a second term, he will be able to get the country through the pandemic. He needs to convince Americans that he's been doing a good job up until now, and then convince them that he will do a good job once he's reelected. I guess one good point that Trump could make is that if you switch presidents in the middle of this crisis, then it's not going to be handled as well. But if you have consistent leadership throughout the crisis, it'll be handled a lot better. I think that's one of the reasons why George W. Bush won the 2004 presidential election against John Kerry. That was when they were right in the middle of the Iraq War. It had started in like 2002, 2003, that war. They were in the Iraq War, they were in the Afghanistan War. And because a lot of people thought that it would be too risky to switch leadership in the middle of a crisis like that, a lot of people just stuck with George Bush because that they thought that was the safer option for dealing with that specific crisis. So if Trump makes a similar point, but with the pandemic and the economic crisis, then that could definitely convince people to vote for him. Anyway, that's all for the video. These are all just my thoughts on the issue. I hope you tune into tomorrow's video. See you then.